Welcome to London. The year is 1887. You have just arrived in the largest city the world has ever seen, the beating heart of an empire that stretches across 1/4 of the entire planet. Look around you. Nearly 5 million people live here, packed into these streets, and every single day thousands more keep arriving, chasing work, chasing fortune, chasing the dream of making it in the capital. This is not just any city. This is the center of the world, the place where decisions are made that affect millions of lives from India to Africa, from Canada to Australia. And right now, this whole city is celebrating. Queen Victoria has just completed 50 years on the throne, and London is throwing the biggest party anyone has ever witnessed. But here is the thing. Behind the flags and the parades and the champagne, there is another London. A London of crowded slums and desperate poverty, where families of 8 share a single room, and children work 14-hour shifts just to survive. 2 cities, really, existing side by side, pretending not to see each other. So which London do you want to visit? Well, stick around, because we are going to see them both. The city that spreads out before you in 1887 is a place of stunning contrasts, where ancient history collides with modern ambition on every single street corner. The Tower of London still stands after 800 years, its grey stones holding centuries of royal secrets, while just a few miles away, engineers are laying the foundations for something brand new, the Tower Bridge, which will not be completed for another 7 years. The River Thames cuts through the city like a dark artery, its waters crowded with steamships and barges and small boats carrying goods from every corner of the empire. Along its banks, the docks stretch for miles, and on any given day you can find tea from China, wool from Australia, cotton from India, and sugar from the Caribbean, all being unloaded by thousands of workers whose muscles power this global trading machine. The streets themselves tell the story of a city growing faster than anyone can manage. In the wealthy West End, you find wide boulevards lined with elegant townhouses, their windows glowing with the warm light of gas lamps, their doorsteps scrubbed clean every morning by servants. Regent Street and Oxford Street are already famous shopping destinations, where the growing middle class comes to spend money on fashions and luxuries that would have been unimaginable to their grandparents. But travel just a few miles east, and everything changes. The neighborhoods of Whitechapel and Spitalfields are a maze of narrow alleys and crumbling buildings, where the air itself seems thick with coal smoke and the smell of too many people living too close together. There are no wide boulevards here, no elegant townhouses, just endless rows of tenements where families crowd into spaces never meant to hold so many human beings. And connecting all of it, above and below ground, is something truly revolutionary. London has had an underground railway since 1863, the first in the world, and by this year nearly 40 million passengers ride it annually. Steam engines pull carriages through tunnels beneath the city streets, and if you can handle the smoke and the noise and the crowds, you can travel from one end of the city to the other in less than an hour. The future is already arriving, but not everyone gets to enjoy it equally. But who exactly is running this massive empire, this city of 5 million souls and countless ambitions? The answer begins with a woman who, by 1888, has become the most famous monarch on earth, yet one that almost nobody ever sees in public anymore. Queen Victoria is 69 years old, and she has been wearing the crown for over 50 years, longer than most of her subjects have been alive. But here is what most people do not fully understand about Victoria. Ever since her beloved husband Prince Albert passed away back in 1861, she has retreated from public life almost entirely, spending most of her time at Windsor Castle or her estate in Scotland, dressed in black mourning clothes that she will never stop wearing. The people of London celebrate her name, they cheer at her jubilees, they hang her portrait in their homes, but most of them have never actually seen her face in person, and they probably never will. The real day-to-day business of governing falls to the Prime Minister, and in 1888 that man is Lord Salisbury, a conservative aristocrat serving his second term in office. Salisbury is a cautious, calculating politician who believes the British Empire should expand carefully, and that change at home should happen slowly, if at all. He works from the Houses of Parliament, that magnificent Gothic building along the Thames that was completed just 30 years earlier after the old palace burned down, and from there he oversees an empire that spans the globe, making decisions that affect the lives of nearly 400 million people. But there is a growing tension in British politics that even Lord Salisbury cannot ignore. The working class is getting organized, trade unions are gaining power, and more voices are demanding that ordinary people deserve a say in how they are governed. The franchise has been expanded twice already, and millions of men who could never vote before now have that right, though women will have to wait another 30 years before they see the inside of a voting booth. The empire looks strong from the outside, unshakable even, but underneath the surface the foundations are beginning to shift, and the world that Victoria has ruled for half a century is slowly, quietly, starting to change into something else entirely. And if political power flows from Parliament, economic power flows from something even more influential: the banks and trading houses of the City of London, where the pound sterling reigns supreme as the most trusted currency on the planet. In 1888, London is not just the capital of an empire, it is the financial capital of the entire world, the place where fortunes are made and lost, where investments flow in from every continent, and where the price of everything from Egyptian cotton to South African diamonds gets decided by men in top hats sitting in mahogany-paneled offices. The Bank of England, founded nearly 200 years earlier, serves as the anchor of this entire system, and its gold reserves back up a currency so stable that people from New York to Hong Kong prefer to do business in pounds rather than their own money. But here is where the story gets complicated, because while unimaginable wealth flows through this city every single day, the people who actually make things work rarely see much of it. A skilled factory worker in 1888 might earn around 25 shillings per week if he is lucky, which sounds like something until you realize that a single room in a decent neighborhood costs at least 4 or 5 shillings just for rent, and a family needs bread, coal, candles, clothes, and medicine on top of that. The math simply does not work for most people, which is why so many families send their children to work in factories or workshops or out on the streets selling matches and newspapers, because one income is never enough to survive. Meanwhile, just a few miles away in neighborhoods like Mayfair and Belgravia, the wealthy elite live in townhouses with a dozen rooms, employ small armies of servants, and spend more money on a single dinner party than a dock worker will earn in an entire year. Two Londons, two completely different realities, separated by just a short carriage ride, but divided by a chasm that most people will never manage to cross, no matter how hard they work or how much they dream. So what does life actually look like for the millions of ordinary people who call this city home? The ones who will never set foot in Parliament or dine in Mayfair or see their names printed in the society pages? Let us follow a typical Londoner through a typical day, and you will begin to understand both the hardships and the unexpected joys of living in the greatest city on earth during the final years of the 19th century. The day begins early, Impossibly early by modern standards, with factory whistles and church bells calling workers out of bed while the sky is still dark, sometime around 5 or 5:30 in the morning, depending on the season. There is no snooze button, no leisurely breakfast, just a quick wash in cold water if you are lucky enough to have a basin, a piece of bread with maybe some dripping or a cup of weak tea, and then out the door into streets that are already filling with thousands of other workers heading to the same factories, the same docks, the same workshops, where they will spend the next 12 to 14 hours earning just enough to do it all again tomorrow. The work itself is grueling in ways that are hard to imagine today. Factory floors are loud, dangerous, and poorly ventilated, filled with machines that do not stop for tired fingers or distracted minds. And accidents are so common that losing a finger or suffering a burn is almost considered part of the job rather than a tragedy. Dock workers load and unload ships by hand, carrying weights that would break most people, competing every single morning for jobs that are never guaranteed because employers hire by the day. And there are always more desperate men than there are positions available. Women work too, of course, though their labor is often invisible, taking in laundry or sewing piecework at home for pennies, or working as domestic servants in wealthier households where they might earn £5 a year plus room and board if they are fortunate. And then there are the children, thousands upon thousands of them, working in match factories and textile mills and chimneys, selling flowers and newspapers on street corners, doing whatever they can to help their families survive, because childhood as we understand it today is a luxury that most Victorian families simply cannot afford. Home, for the majority of working-class Londoners, is not a place of comfort or privacy, but simply a place to sleep before the next shift begins. Entire families crowd into single rooms in tenement buildings where the walls are thin, the ceilings leak, and the shared toilet in the courtyard serves dozens of families who all pay rent to landlords who have no incentive to fix anything as long as the money keeps coming in. Sanitation is primitive at best, with open sewers still running through some of the poorer neighborhoods, and clean water a precious commodity that costs money many people do not have. Disease spreads easily in these conditions, and outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis sweep through the slums with terrifying regularity, taking lives that official statistics barely bother to count. The average life expectancy in the wealthiest parts of London hovers around 50 years, but in neighborhoods like Whitechapel and Bethnal Green, a working man is lucky to reach 35, and infant loss is so common that most families have buried at least one child before that child learned to walk. But here is what the statistics and the grim descriptions never quite capture: the fact that even in the midst of all this hardship, people still found ways to laugh, to love, to build communities that looked out for each other in ways that wealthier neighborhoods never needed to. The music halls were packed every weekend with workers spending their precious pennies to watch comedians and singers and acrobats, forgetting their troubles for a few hours in the glow of gaslight and the roar of shared laughter. The pubs were more than just places to drink. They were social clubs where neighbors shared news and gossip, where deals were made and disputes were settled, where a working man could feel like a king for the price of a pint. Families gathered on Sundays for whatever small pleasures they could afford. A walk in Victoria Park if the weather was fine, a trip to the seaside once a year if they had managed to save enough, simple meals shared around crowded tables where everyone had a story to tell and everyone belonged. There was a resilience in these communities, a stubborn insistence on finding joy even when joy seemed impossible. And perhaps that is the most remarkable thing about Victorian London, not the monuments or the empire or the wealth, but the ordinary people who somehow kept going, kept hoping, kept building lives worth living in a city that often seemed determined to crush them. And yet, even as these millions of Londoners went about their daily lives, working and struggling and celebrating small victories, the world around them was changing in ways that none of them could fully comprehend, and the future rushing toward them would transform everything they knew into something almost unrecognizable. In 1894, the city witnessed the grand opening of Tower Bridge, that magnificent structure of steel and stone that had taken 8 years to build and would become one of the most recognizable landmarks on the planet, a symbol of British engineering prowess and imperial confidence that seemed to announce to the world that London intended to remain the center of everything for centuries to come. Thousands of people gathered along the Thames to watch the Prince of Wales officially open the bridge, and the newspapers declared it a triumph of modern civilization, proof that there was nothing the British could not build if they set their minds to it. 3 years later, in 1897, the celebrations reached an even greater peak when Queen Victoria marked her Diamond Jubilee, 60 years on the throne, longer than any British monarch before her. The entire empire participated in the festivities, with troops from India, Canada, Australia, South Africa, and dozens of other colonies marching through London in a parade that stretched for miles, a living demonstration of just how far British power extended across the globe. Victoria herself, now 78 years old and increasingly frail, rode through the streets in an open carriage, and for once, the reclusive queen allowed her subjects to see her face, to cheer for her, to feel a connection to the woman whose name defined their entire era. It was the high point of the British Empire, the moment when everything seemed possible and permanent and destined to last forever. But nothing lasts forever, and the people cheering in the streets that summer had no idea how quickly their world was about to change. Queen Victoria would pass away in January of 1901, and with her would go an entire way of life, an entire set of assumptions about how the world worked and who was in charge of it. Her son Edward would take the throne and give his name to a new era, the Edwardian Age, but the transition would mark the beginning of the end for so many things that Victorians had taken for granted. Within 2 decades, a conflict would erupt across Europe that would claim the lives of nearly 1 million British soldiers, destroy empires that had stood for centuries, and shatter the comfortable belief that progress was inevitable and civilization was marching steadily forward. The Titanic, that ultimate symbol of British shipbuilding supremacy, would sink on its maiden voyage in 1912, taking 1,500 souls with it and proving that human ambition could still be humbled by the forces of nature. And the women who had been denied the vote for so long would finally begin to win their struggle, with suffragettes marching and protesting and forcing a nation to confront the simple injustice of excluding half its population from democratic participation. The London of 1897, with its gas lamps and horse-drawn carriages and unshakable imperial confidence, would transform into something faster, louder, more uncertain, and infinitely more complicated. But the people celebrating the Diamond Jubilee could not see any of this coming. They only knew the world they had, and they assumed it would continue, as most people do, until the morning when they woke up and discovered that everything had changed while they were sleeping. So what remains of that Victorian London, that city of 5 million dreamers and strivers, of empires and slums, of gas lamps flickering in the fog, and children selling matches on street corners? The answer, surprisingly, is more than you might expect, because even though more than a century has passed and the world has transformed beyond anything those Londoners could have imagined, the bones of their city are still there, waiting to be discovered by anyone willing to look. The Tower of London still stands, just as it stood for them, its ancient stones holding the same secrets, and the same ravens that Victorians believed must never leave, or the kingdom would fall. Tower Bridge still opens its great arms to let ships pass through, though the vessels today are nothing like the steamships and sailing barges that crowded the Thames in 1887. The Houses of Parliament still anchor the riverbank. Big Ben still chimes the hours, and if you close your eyes and listen carefully, you can almost hear the echoes of Lord Salisbury's government debating the future of an empire that no longer exists. The Underground is still running too, that same system that began in 1863 and amazed the world with its audacity, though today it carries over 1 billion passengers a year through tunnels that the Victorians dug, with nothing but picks and shovels and sheer determination. You can still drink a pint in pubs that served working men after long shifts at the docks, still walk through parks where families gathered on precious Sunday afternoons, still find corners of the East End where the narrow streets remember the millions who passed through them chasing survival and sometimes finding something more. But so much has vanished too, erased by time and progress and the simple fact that cities, like people, cannot stay the same forever. The great fog is gone, that thick yellow smog of coal smoke that defined Victorian London and slowly poisoned its inhabitants because the factories moved away and the Clean Air Acts changed everything. The slums of Whitechapel have been torn down and rebuilt so many times that almost nothing physical remains of those desperate streets, though the stories survive in books and photographs and the collective memory of a city that has never stopped reinventing itself. Perhaps the greatest legacy of Victorian London is not the buildings or the bridges or even the Underground, but something less tangible and more profound. The idea that a city can be the center of the world, can draw people from every corner of the globe, can contain both unimaginable wealth and desperate poverty, and somehow keep functioning, keep growing, keep offering the promise of something better to anyone brave enough to try. The Victorians built that idea into London's very foundations, and it survives today in every immigrant who arrives hoping for a new start, in every entrepreneur chasing a dream, in every tourist who walks across Tower Bridge and feels the weight of history beneath their feet. The Empire is gone, the Queen is gone, the gas lamps and horse-drawn carriages and music halls are gone, but London remains, transformed yet somehow familiar, ancient yet always new. And somewhere in its crowded streets, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the heartbeat of those 5 million Victorians who built this impossible city, who lived and worked and loved and struggled within its boundaries, and who left behind a legacy that refuses to disappear. History does not vanish. It simply waits for those who choose to remember.